So to join us, and then we'll get started. All right, it looks like everyone has, or at least the majority have joined, so we can go ahead and get started. I apologize, you'll only be seeing me today. Unfortunately, David was not able to make it today. So we're going to have a little bit of extra time, and I was hoping to open things up and be a little more interactive throughout this training. So there will be several sections that I will stop on and we can have some open discussion, or if you would rather drop something in the chat to participate in the conversation, that is perfectly fine. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk about self-care strategies for the busy professional, prioritizing personal well-being, which seems to be related very, very strongly to how busy you are, is how much you're able to prioritize your own personal well-being. So with a little bit of intentionality and a little bit of planning, we're going to build that into our very busy professional lives. And let's get started here on this PowerPoint. So what are some of the roadblocks to maintaining your self-care during a busy work week? I think this happens to all of us. The more professional demands we have, the more our self-care declines. We tend to be kind of the last priority, right? Because oftentimes we think, oh, this is just temporary. I can push through, I can push past my limits, past my boundaries, and just get this one more thing done, right? So as we do that, it's never just one more thing, is it? And what we're doing in our brains and in our bodies is training ourselves to continuously ignore our own cues. So your body and your mind tell you when you need a break, unless you've gotten very practiced at ignoring those signals. And most of us have. I know that I have. I'm personally very guilty of realizing at 5 p.m. that I haven't eaten yet for the day, for example. Um, not a great position to be in. So as our professional demands increase, we have to be very mindful about keeping ourselves in our top priorities. So we talked about declining self-care as we get busier, recognizing the cues. Now, we're going to talk a lot about how to build that intentional self-care routine in this training, but I also want to make sure that I don't overlook the point of seeking support, professional or some sort of help, whether that is part of your personal support structure, family, friends, whoever you can depend on, or a professional, either a physical provider or mental health professional. So it's not all on you. There are lots of resources, there's lots of help. If you begin to try and build this self-care routine and you find that there's still more change, more help, more support that you're in need of, we are going to learn how to practice asking for that help as well. So incredibly important, especially for those of us who have a good support structure and are just terrible at asking for that help when we need it. So setting boundaries is one of the first stops on this journey to prioritizing our self-care, because as we talked about on the first slide, when those priorities get very intense, when they build, when there's just one project after another that we're having to push through, and complete, even though we are absolutely out of spoons for the day. Setting boundaries is the first step to making sure that we are not pushing beyond where we should for our own well-being. I like to talk about boundaries a lot because they're incredibly important. Not only does it helps us to practice shifting our mindset, but it is how we teach others how we want to be treated. You can also set boundaries with yourself, which we'll get into with the self-regard portion of this training. So setting boundaries with yourself looks like maybe something went wrong or you made a mistake. So beating yourself up over it, punishing yourself, negative self-speak. Those are all things that I've had to be very intentional about setting boundaries with myself and saying, you know what? I can see that I'm going down this road of being hypercritical of myself. This is not how I would treat others. This is not how I would talk to someone else, someone that I care about who's in the same situation. So why is it okay for me to talk to myself this way? You have to define your priorities in order to set a boundary. So it's important to truly just sit down, make a list. I'm a list person. Make a list of what are my priorities? What is important to me? What are my values? How can I connect my priorities and my values, my ethics with what I am setting in place for myself to improve my life, which then improves the lives of those who depend on me and those around me. It is difficult to determine your limits because most of us are so practiced at pushing past those limits. So when determining your limits and where your boundaries should be, you may need to rely on resensitizing yourself to reading your own cues, knowing when you're too tired to send another email, knowing when you've got a bad headache and it's just time to take the sick day instead of pushing through. Once you're able to determine your priorities, your limits, shift your mindset towards intentionally protecting those boundaries, they also need to be communicated very, very clearly. Explaining your boundaries and the reasons behind them is especially important in those relationships where we don't have the option of just walking away. So at work, for example, communicating your boundaries becomes so much more important when you have to continue interacting with someone who may or may not be crossing them. So clear communication and practicing saying no. That is so, so difficult for most of us, especially culturally. Women tend to be socialized to be less likely to say no to requests, or anyone who is a helper, who has that servant mindset. It can be very difficult to say no. We feel disappointed in ourselves. We're worried others will be disappointed in us. So practicing polite, constructive language such as, I would love to, however, or unfortunately I'm booked, but I can do this. Those are small ways that you can get more accustomed to practicing saying no and protecting your boundaries. So setting boundaries at work is essential to long-term well-being and career success, because it doesn't matter how well or how hard you work. If you burn out and you lose the ability to continue in the long term, if you are not able to sustain the level that you're working at, that's going to be detrimental to your career, especially as you progress and the levels of responsibility become heavier and much bigger. So what is a boundary? So a boundary is any invisible line that defines what behaviors are acceptable, what you will tolerate. It's a personal guideline. It helps us train others how to treat us. A lot of people get confused on boundaries, though, because oftentimes people think that a boundary is telling someone else not to do something. This is actually not the case. So as we've probably heard in a million different forums and venues, the only person that you can control the behavior of is yourself. So a boundary must be based on your actions, not the other person's. And what that looks like is, let's say someone is speaking to you disrespectfully. So saying, don't speak to me that way, don't talk to me that way, don't raise your voice at me, that's not a boundary. That's a request, or in some cases, a demand, but not a boundary. A boundary is if you choose to act this way, then I will choose to enact whatever this consequence is. Most of the time, the greatest power that we have is the power to withhold access to ourselves from others who don't respect our boundaries. So if someone is treating you in a harmful way, you can say something like, when you treat me that way, or when you talk to me that way, I will leave the room. I'll come back when you can speak to me professionally, when you can speak to me in a kind way. But right now, I'm not going to grant you access to me. I understand that this does not always translate into a workplace, but there are a lot of labor laws and protections in place. If you are ever in a position where you have attempted to set a boundary and you don't have the ability to completely remove yourself from the situation and the other person is not respecting that boundary, at that point, call my team. We'll help walk you through it. But in general, a boundary is just telling other people what your consequence is going to be, what behavior you are going to engage in if they continue to disrespect your boundary. And now I'll stop there for any questions because I think boundary work is incredibly important. What questions do you all have? And if you want to drop them in the chat, Courtney, could you help me monitor the chat?
Absolutely.
Otherwise, just feel free to come off mute and just throw your question out there. Does anybody have any experience in enforcing a boundary where that was effective that you could share with us? Anyone? Oh, go ahead.
In office support, we often have it where we have to establish boundaries of when I can be contacted and when I'm not. I had to establish early on that just because you email me or text me at 2 a.m. in the morning, because that's when you're still working as a faculty member or thing, I will not look at your email until the next morning at 7 a.m. whenever I get into the office. I had a few people that tried to push against that whenever I started, and I had to set a hard line, and they finally got it after about 17 months of working here.
Thank you so much, Calista, for sharing that. That's a very good example of a firm boundary, a healthy boundary. Oftentimes, when we have to set boundaries, it is because there is an unrealistic expectation on the part of the other party, right? So yes, there can be emergencies, and yes, there can be exceptions. You can make exceptions to your own boundary. But if it becomes a regular thing, a regular request, then we probably need to reset and say, you know what, actually, this is where I need to live, not out here. So if we could bring it back here, that would be great. Very good example. Thank you. Did anybody else want to share another example? Just come off mute and throw it out there.
I don't know what we're sharing.
Or it's someone.
So this is Lynn Farrell, and I'm wondering, I have to set a boundary with one of my employees because it sometimes seems to me like they would like to monopolize my time where I have other things and other responsibilities and other tasks. So I feel like I need to say, just cool your jets. We'll talk about this at a better time, but I don't exactly know how to do that with this specific person because she is very, um, you have to pay a lot of attention to her.
Mhm.
So that's my difficulty.
Okay, well, that is a very good example, and I can give a little bit of advice there. Are some of the requests or most of the requests that she's making of you things that are urgent and have to be responded to right then and there, or would it work if you set up just a weekly one-on-one meeting with this person and have them bring a list of all of the questions, all of the issues that they've had throughout the week, and then you can go through their list and answer all of that. Would that work, do you think?
Well, we've tried that and it worked for a little while and then it's something where it's constantly kind of an emails to show me or tell me what she's done and 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 what my I don't know it's kind of complex but it's almost like here we have we don't have the grace to not respond to an email it's as soon as I can or as soon as it's sent like I used to have 24 hours in my former job and I never took that long but at least you weren't under the pressure where you had to like respond right away and that's kind of been the culture around here and sometimes when I don't I feel like I have to apologize for getting in there to the conversation late because I've been doing something else. So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
So it sounds like you could probably approach this from two different perspectives. So one is setting the boundary with others. But on the flip side of that is setting the boundary with yourself, because if you truly analyze what are the consequences of me not answering immediately. So for example, if this employee is telling you, hey, I've completed my work for the day, is there a consequence for you if you don't respond to that or if you respond to it later on? Because if there isn't, then the boundary work needs to be done internally. And that can look something like I will attempt to not feel guilty if I do not respond to a non-urgent email right away, or I will give myself grace. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, I can definitely try doing that. It just sometimes I feel well, and I am very close in proximity to her also. So if I don't respond right away, then she's in my office, and that turns into like there's no simple one question ask it without getting a half hour answer or a very maybe not even addressing the point type of a deal.
So then I would fall back on that communication piece. So very clear communication. Hey, Susie, Sally, whatever her name is, if you send me emails that don't require a response, I'm not going to respond to them, or I may respond to them a day or so later. If you need a response, you could even put something into place such as if you need a response, put I need a response in the subject line. Everything else, I'll get to it when I get to it. So some communication, some self-boundary work, and some external boundary work. I think the combination of all three would probably, and you're right, it is a little bit of a complex situation because they have that physical access to you.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're able to communicate up front that if you don't need an action item from me, these need to wait until our one-to-one meeting on Thursdays,
Mm-hmm.
something to that effect, that
Mm-hmm.
may be helpful.
Okay. Yep. I will definitely try that. Thank you.
Great, no problem. Okay, so next is we're going to look at recognizing the signs that our body or our mind is giving us that it is time to set some boundaries, to do some self-care, to do some self-prioritization, and to invest in ourselves. So these are all the various aspects of self-care. Self-care doesn't always look the same, and it doesn't look the same person to person either. Where, a long bubble bath for one person might be self-care, if you're somebody recently told me this term, I'd never heard it before, an active rester. then that sitting still in a bubble bath for an hour is only going to stress you out. So I'm an active rester, meaning I need to go do something fun as my self-care. I need to go make a craft or build something in my wood shop. That's how I do my self-care, but it doesn't look the same for everyone. But at the end of the day, the signs all do start to look very similar. So it can be trouble sleeping, fatigue, appetite changes. I like to eat my feelings. So I know when I'm getting those ice cream horseshoes at Scoop du Jour on the way home, it's probably time to take a look at my priorities and my self-care and what's going on with me. Digestive issues, trouble focusing, irritability, impatience, anxiety, even sometimes these stressors or long-term chronic stress can manifest into substance use disorders or isolation or overconnecting or oversharing. Basically, if you start to not recognize yourself, or if you start to behave in a way that you think, that's not my usual character, it's probably time to take a step back and do some observing. So one thing that has been suggested to me for decades probably, that I never really gave a lot of credence to, I kind of ignored the advice, was mindfulness. So as a restless person, an active rester, at some point you just have to call it ADHD. I really railed against this whole mindfulness movement until I tried it, which is usually the case, right? So being mindful, it's really simple, but also really complex. The entire idea behind mindfulness is to be present right here, right now. You're not thinking about the future, which manifests as anxiety. What's going to happen? What do I need to do to be prepared? What's coming up next? All the things I have to control, control, control. So that's living in the future or living in the past. So being hyper focused on, something that somebody said that offended you, and oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that to me, or I can't believe how disrespectful this person was, or what have you. So if we can get out of the past and get out of the future and just be right here in the now, then oftentimes we're able to hear our bodies and our minds. We're able to better care for ourselves. And instead of reacting to things, we're able to stop and be proactive about things. What do I want next week to look like? What do I want to do to address or finalize all of these past issues that have come to me? So it just looks like being here now. There's a little exercise that, we have something in the chat. Yep. How do we practice mindfulness when we are stressed and cannot take the time out due to all the tasks that need to be done? Very good question. So it is actually possible to be mindful while doing anything. If you look at this next slide, you can incorporate mindfulness practices into whatever you're doing at the time. Mindfully typing an email, mindfully sipping a beverage, mindfully observing your surroundings. It's really just brain practice. It's not that it's necessarily important for me to drink this tea and think about, oh, it's really good. It'd be better if it was real sugar, but it's good enough, all the things. It's not important to think about the tea. It's important that I'm giving my brain a break from anxiety forecasting or focusing on past issues and problems. Because let's be honest, when we're focused on the past, we're usually not thinking about the happy things, right? We're usually thinking about the less happy things, the more negative things. A simple technique that I use with my children, and they were able to pick it up as early as 4 years old, was going through all of the 5 senses. So start with, and I've heard this done a couple of different ways. The way I did it is, what do you hear right now? And they have to tell me, okay, I hear the hum of the air conditioner. I hear the bubbling of the fish tank. I hear children playing outside. What do you see right in front of you? I see my monitor, I see my mouse, I see my drink, my keyboard. What do you feel with your hands? So fabrics, even clothing, just anything that has a sensory input. What do you smell? And what do you taste? So once you go through all of those check-ins with yourself, because that's really what they are, notice there's very little cognitive room left to think about the future or the past. Now, I've heard a slightly more complicated version of this, which might be more helpful with older children or adults, is doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So 5 things you hear, 4 things you see, 3 things you feel, 2 things that you smell, 1 thing that you taste. Any of those practices to help you think about only the right now and get out of everything else is giving your brain that practice that it needs to be fully present. Why is it important to be present? Because you only experience joy and happiness in the present. You can be excited about something in the future, but you're not experiencing the actual happiness of the situation unless you're in it. So next is investing in yourself. This is probably easier to do than setting the boundaries because it's external, it's concrete. There are things that you can physically do. I can pick up the phone, I can make a therapy appointment, I can schedule some coaching sessions. Once you've really determined what your goals and objectives are, what sort of focus you want to have, then the world's your oyster for how you want to make that happen. So if, for example, one of your priorities is to improve your physical health, a dietitian appointment, that's self-care. It's investing in yourself. A personal trainer, if you can do that. A lot of gyms have free personal trainers that you can sign up for with your membership. I've even tried, there's an infrared sauna here in town. I have never heard of that before and had never tried it before, but I thought, I'm going to do some new self-care that I've never tried before, something interesting, something different. So I went to an infrared sauna for 30 minutes. I think it was like 20 bucks and it was pretty cool. More ways that you can invest in yourself that actually counts as self-care is financial planning. That's huge because how often do you get stressed about finances? Gosh, I wish I could have a new lawnmower. The old one's just terrible, but I can't afford it. Okay. Well, when we sit down and we do our intentional self-care, then we're going to set up an appointment with a financial planner or a debt relief or whatever that focus needs to be. Also, learning new skills is self-care. That's one of my favorite methods of self-care. So if you, okay, a good example, through COVID, my son was very high risk. So we had to lock down. We were in the house, no visitors, no leaving the home for 2.5 years. It was rough. During that time, I thought, man, there are so many things that need fixed around this house. And I don't want to bring a stranger in. I don't know where they've been. I don't know what germs they have. So I learned how to do woodworking and home repair on YouTube. That was my self-care. And it gave me a sense of power over my environment. It gave me a sense of control in a very chaotic time. Everything was scary, everything was up in the air, but I could control the fact that when the leg fell off the piano bench, I could put it back on myself. So little things like that count as self-care. Next is improving your self-regard. Now, this is a lot of self-boundary work, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but just listening to yourself. Take a day, take an hour, however much time you're able to commit to this, and just listen to how you talk to yourself. Listen to your thought patterns, pick up on anything that isn't necessarily accurate, and then challenge those thinking patterns. You can also practice positive self-talk. I know there were, gosh, what was that movie with the Stuart Smalley, was that it? Where he looked in the mirror every day and did his positive affirmations. It's no different than that. Look in the mirror every day, come up with your positive affirmations. If it is important to you to be a kind and fair person, wake up every day, look in that mirror and say, I am kind, I am fair. Cultivating that positive self-talk, it sounds kind of fluffy and nebulous, but you'd be amazed at what's actually happening chemically in the brain when these things are happening. So you're practicing priming the pump, helping to secure those connections in the brain from an unregulated state to a regulated state. And that's where some of these practices can really have far-reaching impact, a positive impact on your ability to just tolerate discomfort and remain in choice. Because at the end of the day, when we run out of capacity, when we run out of spoons, we begin to behave in ways that we did not want to, that are not who we want to be. So lastly is practicing self-compassion. Forgive yourself. Hardest thing to do. It is so difficult to forgive yourself. I have to practice talking to myself the way that I would talk to my daughter or someone else that I love. And I think we talked about this a little bit in the last session, but I recently saw a gentleman doing a presentation, I believe it was probably on TikTok, where he took this a step farther. He said, instead of talking to myself the way I would talk to someone I love, I imagine that I have borrowed this body and this mind from someone that I love. And then I care for myself the way that I would care for that person. So the gentleman described his son. He said, you know, when I imagine that I'm borrowing my son's body, I'm not going to put unhealthy food in it. I'm not going to skip out on getting a solid 8 hours of sleep. All of the things that you would afford to those you love. It helps you to be able to reframe and think of yourself in the same way. Next is prioritizing your physical health. So one major aspect of physical health, of course, is movement, exercise on a huge spectrum of whatever you are able to do, whatever is most appropriate for you and your life and your body. I personally hate to exercise, dread it. I want nothing to do with it. I don't even think it's the physical discomfort that I dislike. It's the fact that I have nothing to think about. Or, you know, the classic example, it is very difficult for me to go to the gym because I want to know why I'm picking up heavy things and putting them down. What's the product at the end? Where are we going with this? Well, nothing. You're just picking up weights and putting them down. Oh my God, I can't stand it. So not only do I try to find activities that I enjoy, but I schedule it. Because if it's scheduled and I treat it like a work meeting, I have to go no matter what. There's no excuse. My calendar's blocked off. I know I'm not busy, and I just have to make it happen. So starting small and building up is a concept that David talks about a lot. And I probably won't do it justice, but I'll try to explain. So there are increments of time, energy, effort, pain even, that the body doesn't recognize because they're so small. So for example, one thing that I tried to work on through coaching and did work on was eating healthier. And the advice that David gave me, I said, well, you know, sometimes I get stressed out and I have a pint of Ben and Jerry's. And he said, okay, still have a pint of Ben and Jerry's, but leave 1 spoonful in the cup when you throw it away. Then the next time, leave 2 spoonfuls. The next time, leave 1/3 of it. Put it back in the freezer for later. The next time, eat half of it. Or whatever smaller. The body doesn't necessarily recognize the difference between a whole pint of Ben & Jerry's and a pint minus a spoon. So if you can gradually shift those habits without the body even knowing, then you kind of short circuit the discomfort that comes in changing habits. Make sense? Anybody have any questions so far? Questions, comments, anything you want to add? Courtney S., I've heard that scheduling time to stress out about things is also helpful. I really like that. Wait, I lost the chat. Where did it go? There it is. Because you don't let yourself stress out all day. You only get to stress during the 10 to 15 minutes you schedule for it. Oh, thank you, Bridget. Gosh darn it, people like me. That was the quote I was looking for. Thank you. So yes, Courtney, I've heard that too, and I think it's really, really helpful. I've actually heard that in the context of grief. So if you are on a grief journey, we all know that's not linear. So sometimes there are times when, you know, the metaphor that I really like is the button in a box. So when something tragic happens, if your whole world is a box with a giant button in it and a ball bouncing around, that ball's going to hit that button every few minutes. As you go on through your grief journey, the box gets bigger and the button gets smaller, but they never go away. So every once in a while, that ball might bounce right into that button, but not all the time. When it does, you're right back where you were on day one. So scheduling time to be intentional, to journal about your grief or about your stress is a really, really good technique for making sure that you're able to function elsewhere and that you're feeling your feelings. That's another thing that I talk to my children a lot about. We don't suppress our feelings because they're going to come out one way or another. If you don't feel it, it's going to show back up, whether that's through physical ailments or just being a bit more irritable or long-term stress impacts on the body, all the things. So scheduling time to stop and feel those feelings, think about them, be fully present in them, helps you to process and then move on. So meal prep, this is another practical piece of advice. And it has to do with being intentional and scheduling things. So if you wait, like I do, until you're absolutely starved, you're more likely to run to that drive-through and eat something that you may or may not have been told by your doctor not to eat. So doing that prep in advance when you can be intentional, when you have your full capacity, it helps you to actually stay in choice throughout the rest of the week. So some of you might have heard the phrase make it easy. So make it easy is part of our customer service, customer advocacy conversations. Make it easy to meet your goals. If your goal is eating healthier, choose your proteins, choose your vegetables, prepare those in advance, do it on a weekend so that you've got them for the week, or whatever it is that is your goal. Make it easy. Do whatever you need to do to make it easier for that to happen later when you're stressed and not necessarily at full capacity. Also, laugh. Just laugh. It's so good for you. There are very few times that it's not in some way appropriate to have a little bit of a chuckle here and there. If you've been through the burnout training that I do, you'll know that the two key factors in avoiding burnout are connecting your beliefs and values with your work and having positive, fun relationships with coworkers. So if you can go to work and it's a horrible day, but for the last 5 minutes, you can stop in at your friend's desk and just laugh about it, even if it's just to keep from crying. There is so much benefit to the body, to the mind. And the research shows that a really good, deep, hearty laugh for an extended period of time has a very similar impact on the body, on your cardiac health, your immune system, as an actual workout, which is good news for me. So be patient with yourself. These are very important numbers to keep in mind because if we're going to be intentional and we're going to plan our self-care, our self investment, we need to know how long we have to prepare that for, how long we have to stay intentional about it before it becomes a habit. So apparently that number is 66 days. So if you can make sure that you're doing something every day for 66 days or every time that that particular situation comes up for 66 days, you're golden after that. Everything gets easier after that point. Commit to implementing a new self-care habit for at least 10 weeks. That's about how long it's going to take for you to see some sort of noticeable change, which then gives you that dopamine release in the brain. That's the reward center that reinforces the behavior. So if you can commit for 10 weeks, then you can see a result. All of a sudden, you've got a connection between your brain's reward center and that self-care commitment. So, and it can be any habit that is helpful for you. Celebrate progress. Stop and really take a moment to celebrate. I am the worst at this. I'll say, okay, I got that right. Let's move on. No, 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 no. You got that right. That's fantastic. Let's enjoy that dopamine. Let's enjoy taking a moment and really celebrating that. Adjust things as needed. You can be flexible with yourself while still maintaining your boundaries. There can be exceptions while still maintaining your boundaries. If you need to make an exception, give yourself grace for that. If I've got some huge time sensitive thing that has to be done by tomorrow, I'm going to have to stay up late and finish it. Okay, that's one exception to my normal boundaries with my workload. However, I'm going to reward myself the next day, or I'm going to make up for that time by scheduling a couple hours off, or go to the nail salon, or whatever it is I need to do to reward myself to make sure that we are still intentional about enforcing those boundaries, because you don't want that gradual shift to happen, the erosion back towards that burned out state. Number 5 is leverage support. Friends, family, professional supporters or caregivers, use what resources you have available. If you try to tough things out without relying on the support structure that you have in place, then you're not doing yourself any service. It's a discredit to you, because imagine what someone else could do if they utilized all of the resources available to them. Imagine it's someone else. You can see the goal where they need to get, and they've got all these resources to lean on, but they just want to tough it out and get there. Is that the most effective or efficient way to get to the goal? No, because you have resources that you can utilize. So don't feel guilty calling a friend and saying, you know what, do you have space for me to vent, because I really just need to get some things out. Okay. Number 6 is expect challenges. Just because it goes wrong, just because we mess up, does not mean that we have to start all over. Doesn't mean that we've lost any of that progress. If you get to day 63 and then you drop off for a day, you're not going to start again. You've already got all of the progress that you've made up to that point behind you. What's happened has happened. Now, if you get to day 63 and you stop for a year, okay, there may be some starting over. So we don't want to do that. We don't want to get disheartened when a slight hiccup comes along, or, if we fail to meet our self-imposed goals, right? We just keep on keeping on. And that gets me through the presentation very, very quickly. We still have about 15 minutes. I'm going to open it up for full discussion. Anything that you all want to talk about, I am here to discuss. If you want to talk about more methods of self-care, if you have questions, comments, concerns, any personal examples you would like to share with the group, I welcome all of it. Just feel free to come off mute and speak up.
I recently had a week vacation
Mhm.
where I tried to cram way too much stuff into it, and our sewage pump broke in the house. There was like a lot of upheaval that happened. We had to go to the laundromat to do our laundry.
Oh no.
Um, it turned out to be the staycation from heck, basically.
Oh,
And I wasn't sleeping well. It was all too much. So I just kind of had to take it back to basics and get myself in a better way.
yeah,
I
yeah.
did. I'm better now. But
Now, have you planned anything to reward yourself for surviving that week so well?
no, I haven't. I'm gonna be off again at the end of this month, for 3 days. And on the third day, I did plan a hair appointment. I'm gonna check out the salon by my house. And normally I just go to Great Clips with my husband and son, so it's kind of a treat yourself thing for me.
Good. I am really glad to hear that because after that staycation from heck, you deserve some additional self-care.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see. Lynn says, when I feel really stressed, I have to get outside and do something in my yard. Oh, I keep losing the chat. Where did it go? There it is. To get outside and do something in my yard. It's my best therapy, but when it gets cold, I struggle. You know what? Same, Lynn, same. I love to garden. My husband's like, you love doing hard manual labor. Yes, yes, I do. In my garden, as long as it's for me, it's for my plants. I have found that doing indoor crafts or one thing that I did because I get a little down in the wintertime too is I built a little miniature greenhouse and it's got the grow lights and the all of the necessary things in it. So I will start my seed trays in the dead of winter. The worst, most depressing parts is usually January and February. Those are the worst months on earth. I'll argue that all day. But that's when I can start my seed trays. And just that little bit of hope, seeing those little sprouts come up helps get me through until I can go out and do my preferred activities, my gardening, all of that. Courtney says, just an extra shout out to parents who stress out at work and come home to more craziness. You've got this. Amen to that. I often refer to going home as heading off to my second job and my third job. Um, it does take a little bit more intentionality in scheduling downtime and giving yourself grace, but it's so good for those kids in your care. It is so good for them to see you caring for yourself, to see you prioritizing yourself, and you're in a better mood when you're with them. Let's see. One says, yes, February is also my birthday month. Great suggestion. Happy, very early birthday. During winter months, you can plot out garden beds for the next year and do some starter plants indoors. Yes, that's a great idea. Karen says, during COVID, when we could not get out, we turned our garage into our family den. We installed 3 TVs to watch our favorite sports teams. We took it one step further and added a mini split so we can be outside all year round. That's a fantastic idea. Thank you for sharing. All right. Any other successes or wins that we want to celebrate here together as a group? Any other challenges that we want to work through together? Feel free to throw them in the chat or come off mute.
I'm kind of like you, Jessica, that I have to be doing something. So often in between emails, I will take a small break and I'll work on either a bit of cross stitch or have my crochet and yarn. Luckily, I have a supervisor who's understanding that I'm still working. I'm just taking a momentary mental break.
Yes,
Not all supervisors and in some areas it's not easy to do that, but sometimes it helps me to refocus.
absolutely. Yeah, even something as simple as taking a breathing break, like we're all breathing all the time, hopefully. Um, but when we're intentionally breathing, we're doing that deep breathing, we're changing our chemistry, we're reducing our cortisol, we're regulating whatever may be dysregulated. So, if you are working a job where it is very difficult to get up and take a walk, or to look at your phone, or to read some sort of fiction in between all of the nonfiction, the 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 minimum you could actually still do is do some of that breathing work. Bridget says, I have been walking on my lunches. I've been trying to get in better shape. I find that I have more endurance the longer I do it. Yes, that is awesome. Bridget, do you know about the walking trails that are in the works that are going to connect all the campuses?
No, I hadn't heard of that.
Well, hopefully I wasn't supposed to keep that under wraps, but that cat's out. But from what I've heard, there are plans to connect all of the campuses with these really cool walking trails. Let's see. What, read and walk around a park near me. That's a good idea too. I'll tell you kind of a funny thing I did when I was a junior staffer at one of the unions I worked at. I had the worst office in the building. It was in the middle, in the basement. So there were no windows, there was no natural light. I hated that office. But I found on, forget where I found it at, a peel and stick window with a beautiful view. It had shutters. I mean, it was all a sheet of like vinyl or something. And you just stick it to your wall. And when you glance past it, it kind of feels like you've got a window with a beautiful view outside. So, I mean, little things like that add up. It may not be a huge thing all at once, but having my fake window, bringing in some plant lights and some plants, that all helped. Carol says Washington Park is great for walking, and they have the Dole Whip Park and Chill. Yes. And I just went there last summer for the first time. It was really good. It's a very good idea. Sun lamps are great. Yep. Get the vitamin D, as long as if there are any dermatologists on the chat, we're wearing our sunscreen. I listen to books on tape before bed to help fall asleep. I find that it helps my mind to focus on one thing instead of being anxious before bed. It is only a problem if the book gets good or I forget to put a timer on and I wake up many chapters later than where I started. Yeah, that's happened to me too. I also recently started listening to audiobooks that are books that I've been recommended to read for work. So if it's like a very technical subject, I listen to them while I mow the lawn. I don't know what it is about mowing the lawn, listening to my workbooks, but somehow that helps me to enjoy it more. I'm outside, I'm in the garden, all the things, but I'm still hearing that information. Yes, it definitely helps me focus. All right, does anybody else have anything they want to talk through? Any questions? Any wins? Right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I appreciate you coming. I believe Courtney will have the recording up on the Hive shortly. All great info. Thank you. Absolutely, Lynn. Thank you so much for coming. Everybody have a fantastic day. If there are any follow-up questions, concerns, comments, feel free to email me. And otherwise, I will see all of you, I hope, next month. Oh, Dee says, what is the Hive? It's our intranet system. You should have a weekly digest email in your inbox that you can click on that will take you there. But if you don't, just go to, I believe it's, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, hive.siu.edu. It is some amalgamation of those letters. Can anybody drop the link to the Hive in the chat actually for D? Thank you. All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'll give you that 5 minutes back on your day. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Thanks. Bye.